Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Ghostbusters. I actually haven't really wanted there to ever be a Ghostbusters 3 for a very long time, and that doesn't mean I didn't want another Ghostbusters movie. I just never really wanted the original Ghostbusters to get back together after a certain point. I kind of realized after the 90s I should not think of it ever possibly being a good movie, and never really thought them coming back was any sort of a good idea. The way they made this Ghostbusters is actually really smart. It's very much trying to do the kind of reboot a franchise thing that Force Awakens did and the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie did, as well as what Jurassic World did, where it starts it off and gives you a pleasant experience. So you're like, oh hey, I would see another one of these because of the first one I saw. It's essentially trying to do what Marvel did with the first Iron Man, just a lot more calculated. But I think Ghostbusters is interesting because I've never seen one of those be so much of an auteur's voice before as much as I saw with Paul Feig's Ghostbusters. In fact, I was often surprised how much of a Paul Feig movie this was. I knew that once they hired Paul Feig, it was very much be a Paul Feig movie, but that's really what I like about it. It feels like a 2016 comedy. It's not trying to be directed the same way the original Ghostbusters is. It's very much kind of its own thing, while also having way too many references to the original. I think maybe that kind of held it back a little, but when it's its own thing, it's really kind of a marvelous, fun motion picture. And that's really what we want from Ghostbusters. If we think about what we enjoyed about the original, it's that it was a fun movie, but it was also a fun movie that everyone could see. I'm actually the perfect age to, I guess, hate this movie, but I was the perfect age to grow up with the Ghostbusters. I watched the first one a lot as a kid, and even the second one. I really like those movies. And what I liked about them is how fun they are, how digestible they are, how funny they could be, and the chemistry between the actors. And this very much does that, but doesn't have the same characters. You don't see Venkman and Egon and Ray, those kind of archetypes here again. You see a completely new group of Ghostbusters with completely new personalities. If this felt like they were just kind of filling personality types, this movie probably wouldn't work as well as it does. It wouldn't have felt as fun as it is. That's one of the things what made Ghostbusters so cool and kind of so surprising originally, is it was something new and different. And I think taking a different approach is exactly the right thing you could really do for Ghostbusters. Now, this movie isn't absolutely perfect, and with Paul Feig at the helm, none of his films are exactly perfect, so that's kind of what I expected for him. In a lot of ways, he made a lot of technical leaps that I never thought he actually could, but storytelling wise, he's about the same, which is really to the film's detriment. In terms of the cast, this film absolutely works. If you didn't have the cast this film does, this film really wouldn't work. But I guess when thinking about this movie, was it worth drudging up the past and comparing it to this film? Does this film drudge up the past too much and is hindered by it as much as so many people's opinion of this film is hindered by the original itself? Or does it completely make its own thing? And is that the whole reason you'd even want to check it out? Dr. Erin Gilbert, played by Kristen Wiig, who's about to become tenured at Columbia University until she is approached about a book she wrote previously with her friend Dr. Abby Yates, played by Melissa McCarthy, about a book she wrote about paranormal activity, and realizes the book is now being sold on Amazon and wants to get it taken down, as that is the first thing that comes up when you search her name on Google. So she goes to find her former friend to hopefully get the book to stop being sold so Columbia doesn't find out and stop her tenure, but then finds out that Abby Yates has been doing paranormal research and goes to this house where there is a haunting with Holtzman, played by Kate McKinnon, and sees actual evidence of a ghost, and the ghosts are real, and gets it on video, puts it on YouTube. Erin Gilbert is fired, and then after the publicity of that, meet up with an MTA worker, Patty, played by Leslie Jones, and start investigating various ghosts that have been popping up all around New York City and try to figure out why so many have been going on currently, as they hope to figure this out and stop this before it brings on, of course, it's a Ghostbusters movie, the end of the world. The thing that really works so well about this movie is the cast. Absolutely the cast, in fact. One of the things they say about directing is a majority of it is casting. If that were more true, this would be a much better movie. But the cast in this, they're so good together. Melissa McCarthy, Kristen Wiig, Kate McKinnon, Leslie Jones. I would see another movie with all of them. They're just really good together. They have great chemistry together. Every single one of them is very, very funny. And I think one of the things about it that's so different from the original is that every single Ghostbuster on this team is a comedian. Ernie Hudson wasn't really. Everyone is very funny in this movie. There's no like one like standout funny person like Venkman. They're all very, very funny characters, and they're also doing some of their better performances. Now, Paul Feig is really good with comedic actors. I mean, hell, he even made Jason Statham funny. I don't think anyone thought that could happen. That says a lot about how good Paul Feig is with actors and comedic actors. And when he has four great comedic actors like he does with these four, it's almost a match made in heaven. I mean, it's just like absolutely fantastic. Kristen Wiig is probably the best I've seen her, at least in a mainstream movie, in a long time. I know she does a lot of smaller art movies, but I think she's actually really good as the kind of straight man or straight woman. I mean, the archetype of a straight man, I'm not trying to say that, you know, the straight person, I guess. She's actually really good at it, but she's still very funny. Particularly her charisma with Melissa McCarthy is really good. Melissa McCarthy is not playing the typical kind of Melissa McCarthy role that you even expect from her in a Paul Feig movie. She's always at her best with Paul Feig, and that's true in this movie as well. How Melissa McCarthy just kind of plays a different kind of role for her, but it feels so natural. She's toned it down quite a bit, but it works really well for the character. You actually remember that she's an actress in this film. You never really see her flex that as much. It almost feels like she's on autopilot as you see her do so many of the kind of the Melissa McCarthy archetype, and is as good as she is, kind of shows you how strong of an actor she really is. Leslie Jones is quite funny. Apparently that role was originally written for Melissa McCarthy, and they switched the roles basically, and I think that was a smart move because Leslie Jones is really, really funny, and Leslie Jones has really been killing it on SNL this whole season if you haven't checked her out, but she brings the Leslie Jones shtick to this. I think that's kind of something that both Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Wiig brought to their first film with Paul Feig, which was Bridesmaids, but in this film I think Leslie Jones and Kate McKinnon get to bring their own personalities more so than Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy are more playing roles, whereas Leslie Jones and Kate McKinnon are more, although they are very much good actors and can very well develop these characters, it very much feels like the kind of shtick that you're used to, especially if you've seen them on SNL and you're aware of their comedic personas, and Leslie Jones very much so. But really the absolute standout of this film is Kate McKinnon. I almost couldn't believe how good she was. She doesn't have as many lines as like Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy, who are still very funny, but Kate McKinnon, just like, even if you don't find one of her lines funny, she brings so much enthusiasm and humor to like almost every line, even in the big special effects sequences where it almost feels like no one has any personality. She almost always does, and just cutaway shots. I would be shocked if Kate McKinnon doesn't have an amazing film career because of her performance in this. It reminds me of Melissa McCarthy coming out in Bridesmaids. It's just absolutely astonishing how funny she is. She is just absolutely hilarious. Paul Feig, there's always someone who surprises you in some of his movies that you're like, I didn't think they could do that, whether it's most of what happened in Bridesmaids, whether it's Sandra Bullock, it wasn't that surprising, but just go with me, in The Heat, whether it's Jason Statham in Spy. But Kate McKinnon, I guess she didn't surprise me because I know she's a great comedian. I kind of wish she had a bigger role, but she does it so perfectly, I don't want to mess with it. Now, the story of this movie, I do not like as much as the actors. In fact, I think the acting in this movie is far better, but the direction by Paul Feig and the script, which is written by Kate Dippold and Paul Feig, just doesn't stand up. I think a lot of it comes down to that Paul Feig is always more concerned with the laughs than the plot. He very much is in the Apatow school, I guess, or that kind of a style, whether you want to call it the Apatow style or not. That's very much the style it is, that you have kind of a semblance of a plot, not very much of a plot, and have a lot of jokes bounce off of it. And when he does that, he's very good at it. But this is probably, in terms of story structure, the worst he's ever been with that. It's so funny in some places. And although he sacrificed having good action sequences in Spy and Heat for more of that, like, I don't even remember what the plot of The Heat was. I just remember laughing. Pretty much the same with Spy. And that doesn't really work for Ghostbusters, although the original Ghostbusters film didn't have as much plot-heavy stuff as Ghostbusters 2, which didn't work. I guess the cartoon show, come to think of it, is probably probably more known for the plot-centric stuff. So in a way, it makes sense, but he kind of tries to act like it has more of a plot than it really does. I know his films do a lot of takes and shoot a lot before they're condensed into what they are, and this film very much felt that way, but it also felt that way in terms of story. There's a lot of things that have payoffs later that aren't built properly, because instead of building them properly, he has a really funny scene, and it's really funny while you're watching it, but it doesn't help the film later, and I think that happened almost too often. And then you have all these references to the original Ghostbusters, which really held it back. And in fact, I think the thing that holds this film back, which is also what's holding back all those assholes who say they aren't going to see it, is the original, because they over explain things. They have too many times where it's like, well, that was the origin of that, and you're like, okay, I didn't really need to know how the Ghostbusters symbol happened. There's too many times where they explain things that, like, the original didn't, and there's a reason they didn't. They didn't just not explain it because they're poor storytellers. It's kind of a thing I've noticed with this newer school of comedy. They'll explain things where you're like, you're not a better storyteller because you over-explain things. You're a better storyteller if you know how to actually understand what things you need to take in and what things don't need to be explained for the story. And this film just doesn't understand that. The cameo from Dan Aykroyd is almost completely worthless. The Bill Murray cameo is fine, but like most of these cameos are just there to be like, oh look, it's the original, isn't that cool? But it has no bearings on the plot. Whereas like something like Star Trek or The Force Awakens, that character has something to do with it. And I'm glad that they're not in it, passing the proton pack down. I think that would have hurt it. I like this film the most, and I think most people do, when it is itself, when it's Paul Feig being himself. That's what's so marvelous about it, really. When you think of what's going on with studio filmmaking and these franchises, you don't often get to see the filmmaker's personality as much. I mean, maybe like Guardians of the Galaxy, you really usually don't get to see it be as much of their movie as Ghostbusters is, and I think that's why this movie really works so well. Sony is the kind of studio, when they really get into things, they're not like Disney, where if Disney is overly involved in something, it turns out to be good. If Sony's overly involved in something, it turns out to be The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And you can tell there is a lot of studio mangling in this, but it seems like Paul Feig manages to get his personality as a director through anyway. It probably helps that he's more of a fully formed director than a lot of the people who are taking on these reboots. That's not to say he's a better director necessarily, but I really like that about it, and I think that's when this movie sings, when it's very much itself. It's why this Ghostbusters cast works. It's why Paul Feig works, because they understand how to be themselves, and that's an amazing thing to watch, and that's the fun thing to watch, and that was why the original Ghostbusters worked, because it had that unique personality. And I think having a unique personality really works for the Ghostbusters in general, but having it held back by another group's unique personality is the problem. I don't really mind the Ernie Hudson cameo or the Janine cameo. Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray, which I guess are the two I'm supposed to be most excited for. I like Bill Murray's fine, but I kind of don't think it helps the movie necessarily. I really wish they hadn't had them as much. I really wish it had been just its own thing. It was interesting to learn about the tech, certainly, and how they built that, because they don't really get into that as much in the other Ghostbusters movies. The logo thing was irritating. Everyone hates the car thing. That's fine for me. It was just the cameos and having so many references. It almost felt like they're so beholden to the original films, but it's like you want to be a reboot, you want to be its own thing, where this is a separate universe, where these are the Ghostbusters. There were no Ghostbusters before. I get that. That's fine. The plot's written in such a way that you feel like you're seeing beats from other movies. It almost feels like Baby's first Ghostbusters movie, the way the plot moves. It's so predictable that by the end it's like kind of boring. And so these cameos do actually naturally work within it, because the plot and script is so kind of cheap and easy to go down. It's almost too easy to go down. The Ghostbusters were kind of movies that were for everyone and for kids, and I think this is a film kids could easily understand, but it's not a great movie. Now, saying it's not a great movie, I never really understood hating on this movie because they're women mainly cast in this. A lot of it is that. A lot of it, this movie isn't for you. A lot of it is that movie isn't for you and it's for women. And as someone who sees a lot of movies and not all of them are made for me, I just don't really care about shit like that. And I'm not saying I don't care about sexism, because what I'm saying is I don't care about your point of view that you hate this because it's all women and because it's not for you. So much of our media is made for particular demographics, and so we're used to everything being made for us. And as soon as it's not, we get angry and we call it stupid and immature and garbage and trash, and that's so limiting. This kind of thinking is not helping art whatsoever. I'm talking about the movie that I saw, and refusing to see it, you're clearly not someone who really likes movies. I think the issue with this is your stupid childhood will not affect the future of filmmaking or culture or anything like that if you have such a shitty attitude about it. Just because you wish Hollywood was like this imagined idea that you had from the 5 videotapes you kept renting from the video store, and you wish it would go back to that even though it wasn't really like that, it was just an imagined way that it was like that, and this whole thing is an argument against something that makes absolutely no sense, is just inappropriate and limiting, and I'm not really ever going to be about anything like that. Frankly, one of the things I like about movies is seeing different experiences. When I got to the end of this film, I was like, was this all worth it? I kept thinking, was it worth it talking about this whole thing? Because I don't honestly think this movie's like an amazing film, but it was worth it in terms of saying like there shouldn't be this kind of sexism in terms of filmmaking, and it shouldn't be the kind of sexism when it turns to casting, especially when the fact, I was talking to a friend and they said that if you think about how they cast the original Ghostbusters, these are the correct kind of people to cast now. It was my friend Ely, and he was very much right. If you just look at all that and you really consider what this movie is to the original, there's no reason to hate on it because of that. Hate on it because it's not a great movie, but hating on it because there's an imaginary third Ghostbusters that you always hoped would happen that didn't, and that Force Awakens was for you and this isn't, is silly and stupid, and maybe you shouldn't really be seeing movies like this anymore because you don't have an open mind and nobody wants to get inside. This isn't a great movie. The reasons it's not a great movie isn't because of sexism or because the original Ghostbusters is a better movie, which it is. It's because there's problems with its story, and there's problems that held it back, which is the original Ghostbusters, which is kind of the funny thing about watching this film, is you realize how much that original film held it back, but what worked about it is it's being its own unique Ghostbusters. And that was what's so awesome about it. What both the discussion of this film and this film does, which doesn't do in a great way, but is that you kind of need to do what you're into regardless of what everyone else is saying, and it does give kind of an empowering message. I don't think the original Ghostbusters was as empowering as this movie is, because it is saying to try to do your own thing, despite that New York City isn't really for them, despite that the world isn't really for them, despite that most people who liked Ghostbusters previously might not be for them. They're here. Out of all the reboots, I have to say I definitely respect this movie. I might not necessarily like it, but I respect it because it was its own thing and it did its own thing, probably more than I've seen a lot of like these big Hollywood kind of starting its own expanded universe type of movies. Even if it's not as good or as amazing as the original Ghostbusters or Citizen Kane or whatever, nothing is going to change if it's as good as whatever movie you have in your mind that you've built up way more than probably it ever should be. Even though, I like Ghostbusters, but calm the fuck down. If this had just been its own original thing, and if we had let this be its own original thing, maybe this film wouldn't be such a polarizing thing. I don't necessarily think while I was watching it, to me, it isn't polarizing because these people are very funny. All of the sexism at it was just upsetting and sad, and I think one of the things I never like about people in films is when they're limited about any view of film, and they're just like not interested for very stupid, silly reasons that are just them not wanting to experience new things or different things. Even when I think about what was the Ghostbusters they wanted, where Seth Rogen and Jonah Hill get the proton packs from Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd, that sounds like an awful movie to me. I kind of am glad that this kind of a movie happened. As for me and Ghostbusters, I think it was a really fun time at the movies and lived up to the Ghostbusters brand as these kind of reboots do. And it did what it's exactly trying to do with a kind of legacy sequel reboot, kind of starting an expanded universe type of thing. Even if I don't like the story, I still laughed quite a bit, and I think that's honestly what Paul Feig cared about the most. And when you leave and you're thinking about this movie later and thinking about Kate McKinnon, how funny this film is, that's what you'll remember as well. I won't remember what the plot was as much, but I don't know if that's really what I remember from the original Ghostbusters either. I just remember laughing and having a good time, and this Ghostbusters certainly lives up to that. So if you have seen Ghostbusters and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.